At one of the tables sat Sebastian Crawford in a wheelchair. His back was broken. The doctors had given a grim verdict: paralysis below the waist. It was at that moment that she approached his table, a little girl no more than 6 years old. Her dress was simple but clean. She didn't look like a beggar. She looked straight at him and said quietly, "Give me your leftovers and I will teach you how to walk." Sebastian froze in disbelief. He had never heard anything like that before. In the past 6 months, he had been offered everything, from dubious folk healers to the most advanced medical treatments. But leftovers in exchange for the ability to walk again? That was the most absurd thing he had ever heard. 6 months earlier, Sebastian Crawford, the owner of a technological empire, had been at the peak of his career. He was signing multi-billion-dollar deals and his name was on every magazine cover. He believed that money and connections could solve any problem. But everything changed in an instant. A plane crash, which he miraculously survived, left an indelible mark. He had since visited the best clinics in the world, hired the most renowned neurosurgeons and rehabilitation specialists. All in vain. He laughed, a dry, joyless laugh. Reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket, he pulled out a thick wad of cash, counted a few bills, and laid them carelessly on the table. "Take it and go. I'm not hungry." But the girl didn't move. She looked at the money as if it were something alien, something that had nothing to do with her. "I'm not asking for money," she said quietly but firmly. "I'm asking for your leftovers. In return, I'll teach you to walk." Her words were so serious that Sebastian stopped laughing. The smile faded from his face. For the first time, he looked at her not as an object of pity or amusement, but as a person. Her eyes were the color of autumn skies, deep and filled with something he couldn't comprehend. It wasn't naivety. It was absolute certainty. At the next table, 2 men were watching the scene: Caleb, Sebastian's personal assistant, and Ezra, his bodyguard. "Want me to get rid of her, boss?" Caleb whispered, taking a step forward. "No," Sebastian said sharply. He couldn't explain why, but this little girl who had just entered his life held his attention in a way no one else had for the past 6 months. Silence fell. The only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves outside and the faint, steady beating of Sebastian's heart. The first time he had truly heard it in months. The sound of rustling leaves and the distant hum of the city filled the silence. Sebastian and Audrey looked at each other, and in that silence there was something important. Seconds stretched into minutes. Sebastian studied her face, trying to find even the slightest hint of deceit, but found nothing, only calm, emotionless seriousness. He remembered all the insane offers he had received before, yet this was by far the strangest of them all. And still, something in her eyes convinced him. This was no childish fantasy. 2 minutes passed. That was all the time it took for Sebastian to make the strangest decision of his life. He took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump from a great height, and exhaled sharply. "All right," he said. "The leftovers are yours. Now show me what you can do." There was no triumph or joy on Audrey's face. She simply nodded. Sebastian gestured toward the plate, and she carefully approached the table, gathered the dishes, and began placing the remains of his meal into a small paper bag she had brought with her. Meanwhile, Sebastian glanced at Caleb, who was staring at him in disbelief. "Caleb," said Sebastian, his voice unusually calm, "cancel all my meetings tomorrow. We might have to reconsider our entire schedule." "But boss," Caleb began, trying to protest. "I said cancel them," Sebastian interrupted firmly. "I think I'm about to have my first lesson in a new life." Caleb stood frozen, his mouth slightly open in shock. He had been by Sebastian's side for the last 10 years, had seen him in every situation. At high-stakes negotiations where corporate empires were decided, at lavish parties where Sebastian reigned like a king, and during the dark months of despair after the crash. But he had never seen him like this. The man who had shut himself off from the world was now agreeing to the most absurd thing imaginable, and not just agreeing but rearranging his entire life for it. Caleb knew this wasn't a joke. There was a tone in Sebastian's voice, that old steel edge he hadn't heard in a long time. It was the voice he used only when he had made a final, irrevocable decision. By that time Audrey had finished. She neatly tied the bag containing the leftovers and picked it up. "Let's go," she said. "Go where?" Sebastian asked, his voice regaining its familiar sharpness. "Somewhere we won't be disturbed," she replied calmly. "We'll need your home." "I'm not going to the mansion," Caleb said first, but Sebastian raised his hand, stopping him. "Ezra," he called, "help me and wait for me by the car. Caleb, you stay here." "But boss," Caleb began again. "I said stay," Sebastian interrupted firmly. "I don't want you involved in this. It's my problem." There was such determination in his eyes that Caleb backed down without another word. Ezra, a tall, silent man with a face seemingly carved from stone, stepped forward. He asked no questions, just helped Sebastian transfer from the wheelchair into the car. Then he folded the chair and placed it carefully into the trunk. Audrey sat in the back seat, her small bag of leftovers resting on her lap. They drove off. During the ride, Sebastian remained silent, his gaze fixed on the rearview mirror, on Audrey's reflection. He couldn't understand what had driven him to do this. It was irrational, absurd even. And yet, for the first time in months, he felt something stir within him, a faint sense of hope, a flicker of curiosity. Half an hour later, they arrived at his mansion. Ezra helped him out of the car, unfolding the wheelchair once more. Sebastian rolled into the courtyard and Audrey followed. She walked calmly, showing no surprise at the sight of the grand estate. The house was built in a classic style, with tall columns and wide windows. The garden was immaculate, every bush and flower perfectly trimmed. Everything here spoke of wealth and power, yet Audrey moved through it as if it were any ordinary home. "You said no one will disturb us," she said. "I need a place to work." "We're at my place," Sebastian replied. "I live alone, just the staff around." Audrey stopped near the main entrance. She looked at Sebastian, then down at the small bag in her hands. "First, give me what you promised," she said. Without a word, Sebastian turned toward the door. "Take it to the kitchen," he said. "They'll handle it there." "No," Audrey replied. "You have to give it to me yourself." Sebastian frowned. He could feel his old irritation returning. "What kind of nonsense is this?" he snapped. "I've already given it to you. Take it." "I told you," she repeated softly, "you have to give them to me yourself." "It's part of the deal," Audrey said quietly. "You give and I receive. That's the law." Sebastian remained silent for a while, studying her face. Finally he gave in. "All right." He bent down, picked up the bag of leftovers Audrey had placed beside his wheelchair, and handed it to her. She took it with both hands as if it were something precious, a sacred object. Then she turned and walked toward the back door leading to the kitchen. "Ezra," Sebastian said, "follow her. Make sure she doesn't talk to anyone and that no one touches the bag. I want her to handle it herself." Ezra nodded silently and followed the girl. Sebastian was left alone in the courtyard. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel helpless, only strange. Something was happening and he had no idea what kind of lesson awaited him. He waited. 20 minutes later, Audrey returned. Her hands were empty. "Well, what now?" Sebastian asked. "Now you'll give me paper and a pencil," she replied. "Why?" "Because that's the next step. The law." Sebastian sighed and shook his head. He didn't understand any of this but decided to play along. He wheeled himself into his study, a sleek, modern room filled with technology, computers, holographic projectors, interactive screens. He found a notepad and a pen and handed them to her. Audrey sat down on the floor, straightened her back, and placed the notepad on her knees. Then she began to draw. Sebastian watched her. The sight of this small child surrounded by all his cutting-edge devices, yet using nothing but a simple pencil and paper, was oddly unsettling. She drew strange symbols, intricate lines, and patterns that made no immediate sense. 15 minutes passed. Then she stood up and handed the notepad to him. Sebastian looked at the page. It wasn't words. It wasn't numbers or formulas. It was a collection of strange signs woven together into a pattern. At the very center, a figure resembling a spider's web. "What is this?" he asked. "It's the plan," Audrey replied. This is how I'll work. And this, she added, is your first lesson. Lesson? He repeated. You'll sit here, she pointed to a spot on the floor, and look at this drawing. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't think about anything else. Just look. Keep your eyes on it until I return. I'll be back in an hour. With that, Audrey turned and left the study. Sebastian sat there, stunned. What was this? Some kind of psychological trick? Hypnosis? He was prepared for anything, for con games, manipulations, but this seemed too absurd even for that. He looked down at the drawing again. Just a tangle of lines and symbols. Nothing more. Nothing that made sense. He was about to throw the notepad away, but something stopped him. There was something in her eyes, that quiet certainty of hers. He thought that if he didn't do what she said, he might never find out what would happen next. His curiosity was stronger than his cynicism. So he sat there and looked at the drawing, as if his life depended on it. An hour passed. In that time, Sebastian went through an entire storm of emotions. At first, he was angry at himself, at the girl, at the absurdity of it all. He was Sebastian Crawford, and here he was, sitting in a chair, staring at meaningless scribbles like some puppet. Then came shame. What if anyone found out? But soon he realized he had nothing left to lose. He was already at the bottom. His body was useless. His life had lost all meaning. Perhaps this absurdity was the only thing that could still save him. The drawing didn't change, but Sebastian, without noticing, began to see something in it. He started to recognize patterns, lines that flowed from the center outward. He focused, and felt something shifting in his mind. He couldn't tell what it was, but it felt like waking up from a long sleep. He was no longer looking at it as a drawing, but as a plan. A structure, a key to something important. He felt his consciousness expanding, as if he were seeing more than he ever had before. Exactly 1 hour later, the door to the study opened. Audrey stood in the doorway. There were no questions in her eyes. Well, she asked. Did you see what you were meant to see? I think so, Sebastian said slowly. What you felt, Audrey replied, is the beginning. That's your first lesson. You had to understand that everything has a plan, everything has its own system. And if you can't see it, you'll never achieve anything. She stepped forward, took the notebook from his hands, and looked up at him. Now you know, she said. The second lesson will be tomorrow. And it won't be as easy. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Sebastian wanted to stop her, to ask what it all meant, what she planned to do next. But before he could say a word, she was gone. He sat alone in his study in his wheelchair, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel hopeless. He felt alive. His mind was racing, but he couldn't form the thoughts. He only knew one thing. The little girl who had taken his leftovers had just shown him a path, and he was ready to follow it. The next morning, Sebastian Crawford awoke to an unfamiliar feeling, the absence of despair. When he opened his eyes, he didn't call for his staff. He didn't check his messages or the endless flow of business reports on his tablet. Instead, he rolled himself to the window and drew back the curtains, letting the sunlight flood the room. For the first time in months, he didn't look at the world as a stage he could no longer perform on. He looked at it as something greater, something he didn't yet understand. Audrey's words echoed in his mind. Everything has its system. He had always been a man of systems. Systems of finance, logistics, technology. But this was different. This was another kind of order. At exactly 10 o'clock, as promised, Caleb arrived at the mansion. He looked tense, uneasy. "Boss, what's going on?" he asked as he entered the study. "I've canceled all your meetings, but the board members are calling non-stop. They're worried." "Tell them," Sebastian said calmly, "that I'm working on an important project, one that requires my full attention." "Is it about that girl?" Caleb asked, unable to hide his doubt. "Yes, Caleb. It's about the girl. And I don't want you involved. Just do what I say, and keep everyone away from here." "Ezra?" The bodyguard appeared silently from the hallway where he usually stood. "Yes, sir." "You're staying with me." "Caleb, you're dismissed." As soon as Caleb left, the doorbell rang. Ezra went to open it. On the doorstep stood Audrey. She looked exactly as she had the day before, calm, self-assured, as if arriving for an ordinary appointment. She entered the study and stopped before Sebastian's desk. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Yes," Sebastian replied. "What are we going to do?" Audrey's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Are you ready for what I promised?" she said. "I told you the second lesson wouldn't be easy," Audrey said. "I'm ready," Sebastian replied. Audrey didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Ezra. "Remove him," she said. "Take him out of the chair." Sebastian froze. He had been prepared for anything, but not for this. Ever since the accident, he had barely left the wheelchair. Any movement without it brought him pain and fear. "What?" he said quietly. "No, I can't." "You can," Audrey replied calmly. "You must. You have to remove everything that keeps you from moving forward. The chair is the first obstacle." Ezra waited. He didn't look at Sebastian, his eyes fixed somewhere in the distance, waiting for the order. Sebastian looked at Audrey. There was no pity in her eyes, no comfort, only unshakable certainty. She wasn't asking. She was commanding. "Ezra," Sebastian said finally, his voice trembling. "Take me out." Ezra stepped forward. With one arm, he lifted Sebastian by the shoulders, with the other under his knees. Sebastian could feel how his body failed to support itself. It was the most unbearable sensation he'd had in months. He hung in the air for a moment, and it felt as if his spine might shatter. Then Ezra lowered him gently onto the soft carpet. Sebastian lay on his stomach, motionless. He felt tingling spreading across his body, not pain but something deeper. He couldn't feel his legs, but he felt fear tightening every muscle he had left. "Now," Audrey said. "Crawl." "I can't," whispered Sebastian. "My body doesn't respond." "Your body is part of the system," Audrey said. "And for the system to work, it must be activated. Crawl." "I said crawl." Her voice was louder now, filled with command. Sebastian lifted his head and looked at her. "How?" he asked. "How am I supposed to do that?" "Don't ask how. Just do it," she said. "Your body knows how to crawl. You've only forgotten. Your muscles have forgotten, but they can remember. Think about crawling. Think about the fact that you must crawl. Get on your knees." "I can't," Sebastian said, but his hands were already pressing against the floor, his arms trembling as he tried to lift himself. He fell again. Audrey came closer and knelt beside him. "You don't have to crawl like a man," she said softly. "Crawl like an animal. Your body is an animal that needs to be retrained. You must feel the ground, feel your hands and legs pushing against it. Don't think how to crawl. Think why. Then do it." Sebastian lay still for a moment. His mind was working at its limit. He imagined what it would feel like to crawl, his palms dragging across the floor, his useless legs following behind. He imagined himself out in the wild, defenseless, without a chair, without a house, without anything. Only him and his body. And he had to move, to survive. Suddenly he felt strength return to his arms. He tried again. This time he rose to his knees. His hands shook, but he stayed upright. He looked up at Audrey. "You did it," she said quietly. "Now crawl." Sebastian took his first move. He stretched one arm forward, then the other. His legs didn't obey, he simply dragged them behind him. It was hard, painful. But he didn't stop. He crawled across the floor of his study, like the animal Audrey had told him to be. He crawled across the floor, the same floor where he had once made the most important decisions of his life, where he had signed deals and shaped empires. Now he was just a man, trying to crawl. This was the second lesson, and Audrey had been right. It was much harder than the first. "Stop." Audrey's voice cut through the silence as Sebastian had managed to crawl several meters. "That's the beginning," she said. "Now you know what it is. You know how to start the system. Now, stand up." "I can't." "You can," Audrey replied firmly. "You just have to stand. Don't think about how. Just stand." Sebastian tried to lift himself. His muscles refused to obey. He fell. He tried again and fell again. "You have to think about what you'll do once you're standing," Audrey said quietly. "Your body is a tool. And a tool needs purpose to function. Without purpose, nothing works. Sebastian lay on the floor, breathing heavily. He closed his eyes, and he imagined. He imagined himself standing up. He imagined his legs full of strength, his feet planted firmly on the ground. He imagined himself walking along a beach, feeling the sand beneath his feet. He imagined standing atop a mountain, looking down at the world. He imagined simply walking. When he opened his eyes, something had changed. He could feel his body listening to him again. Slowly, painfully slowly, he began to rise. His legs trembled, but he stood. He stood without the chair. He stood without help. He stood like a man. Audrey smiled. "You did it," she said. "You didn't just stand, you took your first step toward walking. You've learned that everything has its own system. And if you don't follow it, you'll never reach your goal. The third lesson will be tomorrow," she added. "And it will be harder." She turned and left the room. Sebastian remained standing. He looked down at his legs, trembling yet holding him. He could feel his heart pounding, his blood running hot through his veins. He was alive. For the first time in so long, he felt like he was becoming human again. He was ready for whatever came next. He was ready for the third lesson. The next morning, Sebastian woke with a strange kind of fatigue. Every muscle in his body ached, but this pain was different. It wasn't the dull, lifeless ache of his paralysis. It was the pain of muscles working, of progress being made. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an invalid. He felt like an athlete after a long, punishing training session. He didn't wait for Audrey in his study, where the previous lessons had taken place. Instead, with Ezra's help, he moved outside, onto the terrace that overlooked the garden. He no longer feared being seen. He was preparing for whatever came next. He could feel his body regaining its purpose. Caleb arrived exactly at 10. Sebastian didn't send him away. "You'll stay," Sebastian said when Caleb turned to leave. "And Ezra too. I want you both to see this." Caleb frowned, uncertain of his employer's motives. He wasn't just an assistant anymore, he was a man questioning his boss's sanity. But seeing Sebastian's determination, he stayed. At exactly 10:05, Audrey appeared at the garden gates. She walked slowly, deliberately, as if observing every corner of the place. When she reached the terrace, she looked at Sebastian sitting in his chair. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I'm ready," he said. "What do I do?" "You'll walk," Audrey said simply, without a trace of doubt in her voice. Caleb and Ezra exchanged a glance. Sebastian had only taken his first trembling steps yesterday. Walking even a few meters had been a miracle. But to walk, Audrey said, you must first stand. Without a word, Sebastian moved out of the chair and onto the ground again. He felt that familiar heaviness return to his legs. "You must stand," Audrey said, "and then follow me." Sebastian tried. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. His legs shook violently, but he stood. "Don't think about your legs," Audrey said. "Think about the path. Think about where you're going, and what you want to see when you get there." She turned and began walking down the garden path. "I can't," Sebastian said under his breath. "You can," Audrey answered without turning. "You just have to believe you can. That's the system. It's not just muscles. It's your mind, your will, your desire. You must want it, more than anything." Sebastian looked at her. She walked slowly but with absolute confidence. He took a step. The first one. His leg felt like lead. He took another. Then another. He walked, awkwardly, clumsily, but he walked. Ezra and Caleb watched in silence. They were witnessing the impossible. Through the garden they went, Audrey in front, Sebastian behind. He didn't look at his legs, he looked at her back. He wasn't thinking about how he walked, only why. Images flashed through his mind, his childhood, his career, the accident. Everything he had lost. Everything he could still regain. He realized his goal wasn't just to walk. His goal was to reclaim his life. Audrey stopped by the fountain at the center of the garden. "Here," she said. "Now you'll walk around it 3 times. Don't stop. Just walk. Think about how you move." Sebastian obeyed. He began circling the fountain, slowly but steadily. He could feel every muscle working, every nerve firing. It was exhausting, but he was moving forward. 1 circle. 2. 3. He stopped, breathing heavily but smiling. He had done it. He had achieved something real. Audrey approached him and smiled back. "You did it," she said. "You didn't just walk around the fountain. You took back control over your body. You learned that your will is the key, your body is the instrument. And to make it work, you must give it purpose. Now go," she said softly. "Walk back. Don't think about how you'll do it, just go." Sebastian moved again. He walked back along the same path, but this time faster. More confidently. He remembered what it felt like to walk. His legs no longer trembled. His body obeyed. When he reached the terrace, Caleb and Ezra stared at him. There was no more doubt in their eyes, only awe. You did it," Caleb said, his voice trembling as if he'd seen a ghost. "Yes," Sebastian answered calmly. "I did." He turned to Audrey. "What happens next?" "Next," she said, "will be harder still. You must learn not only to walk but to move forward. Not just to go ahead, but to overcome obstacles. The 4th lesson will be tomorrow. And it will be the most important of all." She turned and left. Sebastian remained on the terrace. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but his soul was full of hope. He was ready for whatever came next. He was ready for the 4th lesson. And he knew his system was finally beginning to work. The next morning, Sebastian woke with a new feeling. His body finally felt like it belonged to him. It was no longer a broken shell obeying out of habit. The pain in his muscles was now a sweet reminder of effort, of victory. He no longer felt imprisoned in the wheelchair. He felt free. And that was his greatest achievement. He didn't wait for Audrey, he longed for her arrival. He was ready for the next step, whatever it might be. Caleb and Ezra arrived at 10 sharp. They no longer looked surprised, only curious. They had witnessed the impossible, and now they wanted to see what would come next. Sebastian was already waiting for them on the terrace. His face was calm, confident. "I'm ready," he said. "Audrey, you used to lead people, now you must reclaim that," she said. She walked over to the window and drew back the curtains. Outside lay his estate, his vast garden. In the middle of it stood a helicopter, his private helicopter, the one he hadn't touched since the accident. He couldn't pilot it. He couldn't fly. "Your goal is out there," Audrey said calmly. "You must walk to it, sit inside it, and take off." "That's impossible," said Sebastian. "I can't control a helicopter. I can't feel my legs. I can't press the pedals." "You can," Audrey replied firmly. "Your body is only a tool. Your will is your power. You just have to want it. You just have to believe it." Sebastian looked at her. He didn't know how. He couldn't understand how his will could control what his body no longer obeyed. But deep down he knew she was telling the truth. He left the office and stepped into the garden. He walked confidently as if he'd been doing it his whole life. He was walking toward the helicopter. Caleb and Ezra followed, silent witnesses to the incredible sight. Sebastian, who only days ago had been confined to a wheelchair, now walking toward the helicopter, ready to fly it. He reached the aircraft and opened the door. He sat down in the pilot's seat. His legs couldn't feel the pedals. They didn't move. But he didn't give up. He closed his eyes and imagined himself flying. He imagined his feet pressing the pedals. He imagined lifting the helicopter into the sky. He imagined soaring over his home, over his city, over the entire world. He imagined being free. And suddenly, he felt his legs begin to move on their own. He could feel them pressing the pedals. He could feel his body responding to his will. He pressed the ignition and the engine roared to life. The helicopter rose from the ground. He was flying, over his house, over his garden, flying as he once had before. Then he landed on the same spot. He shut off the engine and opened the door. He looked at Audrey. There was no surprise in her eyes, only calm satisfaction. "You did it," she said. "You didn't just take off, you took back what you had lost. You understood that your will is what drives you. You realized that your body is a tool, and your will is the engine. You understood that everything has its own system. And if you don't follow it, you'll never reach your goal. You did it, Sebastian. You healed yourself." Audrey stepped closer. "I've given you everything I could," she said softly. "I've shown you the path. Now you must walk it alone." "Who are you?" Sebastian asked. "I'm just an instrument. Just a system. Just a key. And now you must open the door yourself. Where are you going? Sebastian asked. Somewhere I'm needed, Audrey replied calmly. I go where someone has lost themselves, where someone needs to find their way. She disappeared beyond the gates. 2 years passed. 2 years since the day Sebastian Crawford once again considered himself a man. 2 years since he had taken his first step, walked through his garden, flown his helicopter, and most importantly regained his life. Everyone saw his transformation, but no one, except Caleb and Ezra, knew what stood behind it. He lived in solitude, and his name once again appeared on magazine covers, not as that of a financial magnate but as a philanthropist. For all those 2 years he searched for her, the strange girl who had appeared from nowhere and vanished into nothing. He used every resource available to him. He hired the best detectives, called in every favor, and reviewed thousands of surveillance tapes. But Audrey simply didn't exist. No traces, no records, nothing. It was as if she were a ghost who had come only to return what he had lost, and then left him, no longer broken but reborn. His life had completely changed. He sold his technological empire, keeping only a small portion of shares to live comfortably. He redirected all his wealth toward charity, founding shelters for the homeless, creating funds for children with rare diseases, and opening rehabilitation centers for people with disabilities. He did everything he could to help those who, like him once, had lost hope. He often visited his projects personally. He no longer feared the public eye. He was human again. He drove his favorite sports car himself, the one that once seemed forever out of reach. He walked the streets without caring about curious glances. His body was strong again, but more importantly, his spirit was free. One day he decided to personally deliver a shipment of dog food to one of the shelters he had founded, his own project. He wanted to see how it was running. He arrived in his car, unloaded the boxes, and carried them inside. The shelter was clean, well kept. The dogs were healthy and happy. The staff were glad to see him, but he didn't want a hero's welcome. He simply wanted to see how his money was helping those in need. He walked through the corridors, glancing into the kennels. The dogs, sensing his kindness, wagged their tails and pressed against the bars. He petted them gently, spoke softly to them. He felt happy, a kind of happiness he had never truly known before. And then he saw her. She was sitting on the floor in one of the isolation rooms, gently stroking an old blind dog. Her voice was calm and tender. "You're a good boy," she was saying. "I know you want to see again. I know you want to move. You can. You just have to want it." Sebastian's heart stopped. He knew that voice, that steady, serene confidence. He stepped closer. He saw her face. It was her. Audrey. She had returned. There was no surprise in her eyes, only quiet calm. "Hello," she said softly. "I knew you'd come, Audrey," Sebastian whispered. "I've been looking for you for 2 years. I used every resource I had. There wasn't a single trace. How did you do it?" "I told you, I'm no one," she answered. "I'm just an instrument. Just a system. Just a key." She gently stroked the dog's head. "I help those who need it," she said. "I help those who've lost hope." "Why?" Sebastian asked. "Because everything has its system," Audrey replied. "Everything has its order. I help them find it. I can't do it for them, I can only show them the way." "But how?" Sebastian pressed. "How do you make them believe? How do you help them change?" "I don't make them do anything," she said quietly. "I only show them that they already have everything they need: purpose, will, strength. And once they see it, they do the rest themselves. You did it yourself. You healed yourself. I only showed you that it was possible." Sebastian looked at her, speechless, unable to express his gratitude, unable to understand how this young girl could do what the best doctors in the world could not. "Can I help you somehow?" he asked. "I can give you money. I can give you anything you want." Audrey smiled. "You already have," she said. "You built this shelter. You gave these dogs a home. You gave them hope. You're already following your own system, and that's all that matters." She stood up. "It's time for me to go," she said. "Someone is waiting for me." "Where are you going?" asked Sebastian. "Where I'm needed," she replied. And what about me? You've already found your path, she said softly. Now follow it. She turned once more and walked toward the exit. Sebastian couldn't stop her. He watched her until she disappeared from sight. He was alone again, but this time he didn't feel lonely. He felt that his life finally had meaning. He felt that his journey was only beginning. Sebastian stood in the quiet of the shelter, staring at the empty doorway through which Audrey had just walked out. His heart was pounding, but it wasn't from fear. It was a powerful, consuming surge of realization. He finally understood. There had been no miracle, no magic. There had been a system and a purpose. Her words echoed in his mind. I'm just a tool. I'm just a key. I'm just a system. And that simple yet profound phrase she once said, about leftovers being good enough for cats and dogs, suddenly made sense. Everything fell into place. Audrey wasn't a miracle or a mysterious child. She was a link. She was the key. But to which door? To the door behind which stood someone. Someone who had created this system, someone who carried this knowledge. Sebastian returned to his car. All the way home he couldn't think of anything else. He was astonished, not only because he had been healed but because it wasn't magic at all. It was something explainable. Psychosomatics. That word kept turning over in his mind. His body had been healthy, but his mind, his will, his faith had been broken. Audrey had helped him repair it. She had broken the barrier he himself had built. When he arrived back at his mansion, Caleb came to see him immediately. "Caleb," said Sebastian, his voice filled with determination. "Starting tomorrow, we're redirecting all our resources. We're looking for a person, not a girl, a woman, who works with psychosomatics. She helps people like me. She doesn't work in a clinic. She probably treats people in secret. Her payment isn't money. She takes something else. Find any information about people like that, anything." Caleb was stunned by his boss's intensity. He saw that same fire in Sebastian's eyes, the fire that had once built an empire. Sebastian was a hunter again, but this time he wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing meaning. The search took several weeks. It was incredibly difficult. Information about such people wasn't publicly available. But Sebastian used his most delicate network of contacts. He involved former intelligence agents who specialized in finding those who didn't want to be found. Finally, he got a lead, a small old house on the outskirts of the city. No signs, no traceable activity. Sebastian went alone. He didn't want anyone accompanying him. This was his personal journey, his own mission. He got out of his car and approached the door. His heart was racing. He didn't know what awaited him. He knocked. A woman opened the door. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes that reminded him of Audrey's. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance. She looked simple, but there was an incredible strength within her. "You're Sebastian Crawford, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, startled that she already knew his name. "Come in," she said. "I knew you would come. I've been expecting you. My name is Alara. I'm her mother." Sebastian stepped inside. The house was clean but very modest. No luxury, just warmth. In the corner stood a small table piled with books on psychology, biology, and medicine. "Sit down," said Alara. "I know you have many questions." "How?" asked Sebastian. "How does Audrey do it? And how do you?" Alara smiled gently. "It's not magic," she said. "It's science. It's psychosomatics. The human brain is the most extraordinary computer in the world. It can control everything in the body. When you had your accident, your brain suffered a severe shock. It perceived the trauma as an end, as a hopeless situation. So it told your body not to move. It shut down your nerve endings to protect you from pain, believing that was the safest way. But how did Audrey change that? "She's the key," Alara repeated. "She found a way to reach your subconscious. She didn't tell you that you could walk. She led you into a state where you made yourself believe it. She planted the idea that you could. She activated your system." Alara explained everything to him. She told him that her system wasn't just healing, it was a reprogramming of the brain. Even the leftovers were part of the psychological process. They were designed to make Sebastian give up something that mattered to him, to make him feel part of a small exchange, to see that his sacrifice served a noble purpose. Ilara herself had spent years working with those whom everyone else considered hopeless. She helped them find strength within themselves. She made them realize they still had a purpose. And once they understood that, their bodies began to respond. "I don't heal people," Ilara said softly. "I teach them how to heal themselves. I teach them how to live." Sebastian was overwhelmed by revelation. He finally understood that his healing wasn't a divine miracle. It was the result of his own will, awakened by Audrey and Ilara. "And the leftovers?" he asked quietly. "They're for the homeless animals," Ilara replied. "That's our payment. We help them and they help us. It's part of the same system, the cycle of energy. We give them food and they give us strength. It's balance." Sebastian stood up. He felt both emptied and fulfilled. For the first time, he truly understood what had happened to him. "I want to help," he said. "I want you to reach more people. I want to build a clinic for you." Ilara looked at him. There was no surprise in her eyes, only calmness and wisdom. "That's not how it works," she said gently. "I don't heal people for money. That's not my goal. My goal is hope. I do what I can the way I can." "But you could help so many more people," he said. "We already do," she replied calmly. "Our system works. Our system isn't made of walls and equipment. Our system is built on faith. And I can't convince people. They must want it themselves." Sebastian realized she was right. He couldn't force her to accept his help. He couldn't make her change her system. But he could change himself. He turned around and left the house. He was alone again, but this time he knew that his journey was only beginning. He knew what he had to do. He had to not only support others but teach them to support themselves. He had to not just give them money but give them faith. That was his new purpose, his new path, his new system. Sebastian left Ilara's modest home with his mind racing. The world he had built, one of numbers, deals, and control, had collapsed to make way for something deeper, unpredictable, and alive. He finally understood that money could buy everything except the most important thing. He couldn't buy her system or her knowledge, but he could give her the means to spread them further. That was his new calling, his new goal. He would no longer be a buyer but a conduit. When he arrived back at his mansion, he immediately called for Caleb. The assistant entered the study with his usual readiness, but there was curiosity in his eyes. He had seen how much Sebastian had changed over the past few weeks and was expecting yet another surprise. "Caleb," began Sebastian. His voice was steady and calm. "Forget everything you know about charity. We're not just going to give away money. We're not going to build hospitals. We're going to create something entirely new." He rose from his chair and walked across the room. His stride was firm and confident. He felt his body obeying him, his mind working at full strength. "We'll call it the Center for Human Potential," he continued. "Its mission will be to help those who, like me, have lost themselves. But we won't heal their bodies, we'll heal their minds. We'll teach them to see purpose, to believe in themselves, and to return to life." Caleb listened silently. This was not the same Sebastian he once knew. Before, his boss spoke of deals, profits, and control. Now he spoke of faith, purpose, and human potential. "How will it work?" Caleb asked cautiously. "According to the principles of the system," replied Sebastian. "Every person who comes to us will have their own Audrey, a mentor who won't tell them what they can do but will make them believe they can. We'll create a sequence of lessons for them. The first lesson will be the simplest: give them faith. The second, make them move. The third, teach them to overcome obstacles. And the final, most important one, help them find their purpose." Sebastian began outlining his plan. He spoke of psychologists who wouldn't follow conventional methods, but would work based on his principles. He spoke of physiotherapists who would teach people not only to move their limbs, but to control their strength through thought. He spoke of spaces that wouldn't resemble hospitals but gardens, where each person would have their own path. He said the center wouldn't take money as payment. Instead, everyone would bring something precious, something they would give up for the sake of their goal. That offering would then go to charity, just as Audrey's leftovers had gone to homeless animals. Caleb was astonished. He realized that Sebastian wasn't simply starting another charity, he was trying to change the world. And he was ready to do anything to make it happen. The next day, Sebastian returned to Alara's house. He was nervous but full of determination. He knew he had to convince her, because without her, his plan wouldn't work. She wasn't just a specialist, she was the living embodiment of the system. He knocked on the door. Alara opened it. There was no surprise in her eyes, as if she had been expecting him. "I know why you've come," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "You want to buy my system?" "No," Sebastian replied. "I want to share it with the world, with your help." He sat down at the table and began explaining his plan. He didn't talk about money or fame. He talked about people, those who were suffering, who had lost hope, who no longer knew how to live. He spoke of how her system could help them, but that she couldn't reach everyone from this small, humble home. He spoke of the thousands, maybe millions, of people they could help together. He spoke of a new purpose. Alara listened intently without interrupting. Her eyes were calm, but a spark of curiosity flickered within them. She asked questions, clarifying details. She wanted to understand what drove Sebastian, and she saw that it wasn't ambition or pride, but a genuine desire to help. "It won't be a clinic," said Sebastian. "It won't be a hospital. It'll be a place where people learn to believe, to live, to find their purpose. It will be your creation. You'll guide its mission. I'll only give you the resources." Alara stood and walked to the window. She looked outside, lost in thought. Sebastian waited. He knew this was the most important decision of his life, and that he had to let her make it freely, without pressure. "I agree," she said finally, turning to him. "But on my terms. No luxury, no advertising, no money. It will be a place for seekers, and we will help them find what they need. And my leftovers for the homeless animals stay. That's part of the system." "Everything will be as you wish," said Sebastian. They shook hands. It was the beginning of a new era, the beginning of a new system. A system that could change the world. Sebastian left her house, his heart overflowing with joy. He had found not only his purpose, he had found his family, his mission, his new life. And he was ready to begin. The construction of the Center for Human Potential took nearly a year. Sebastian personally supervised every stage of construction, rejecting the projects of famous architects who proposed buildings of glass and concrete. Instead, he chose a design based on harmony with nature and psychological ease. It did not resemble a hospital or rehabilitation center. It was a spacious, bright complex built from natural materials. Huge windows looked out onto a garden with winding paths, fountains, and quiet places for solitude. Inside there were no sterile white walls. The rooms were decorated in warm, calming tones, and the air carried the gentle scent of herbs. It was a place where a person could feel not like a patient, but like a guest who came to find themselves. The center did not accept everyone. Candidates underwent a strict selection process. The main criterion was not their condition, but their readiness to change. They sought those who had lost hope but not the will to fight. Those who were ready to risk everything again for the chance to live. The first patients were 5 people. They were not only those with physical injuries. Among them was David, a former artist who had lost the ability to move his right hand after a stroke. He was full of anger and despair. Anna, a young woman suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome, was bedridden and unable to work. She was depressed and emotionally empty. Michael, a war veteran who had lost his legs, had become withdrawn and lost his sense of purpose. He was a skeptic and believed in nothing. Lily, a girl with a congenital disorder, could not speak but could hear and understand. She was lonely and afraid of people. John, a former financial broker, had lost the ability to move his legs after a fall. He was as cynical as Sebastian had once been. The first day at the center was filled with tension. The patients looked around with suspicion. They expected doctors in white coats, unusual people disguised as ordinary ones. They expected a clinic, not a home. Each of them was met by a personal mentor, trained people who knew the system. John, the cynical broker, was greeted by a young woman named Claire. She was calm and smiling. "Hello," she said. "My name is Claire. I'll be your mentor." What am I supposed to do? John asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You'll tell me I can walk and then I'll just get up and do it? No, Claire replied gently. I'll tell you that you have a purpose, and you will believe it. She led him into a small room where a plate with food scraps sat on the table. Beside it lay a note. Give me the leftovers and I will make you walk. John looked at the note, then at Claire. He laughed. It was the same phrase Sebastian had once heard from Audra. What is this, kindergarten? He asked. This isn't kindergarten, Claire replied. It's the beginning. You have to give something up to receive something in return. It's part of the system. John was furious. He wanted to leave. He couldn't understand what was happening. But he remembered the story of Sebastian Crawford, the man in all the newspapers who had somehow healed himself. He knew Sebastian wouldn't invest millions in nonsense. He decided to stay. Meanwhile, Sebastian and Ilara watched everything unfold through hidden cameras. They're like you, Ilara said, looking at John. They don't believe. I know, Sebastian replied. I was the same. They just need to see that they can. John was the most difficult case. He refused to do what he was told. He wouldn't give away the plate with the scraps. He sat in the room, full of anger and doubt. Sebastian decided to deal with him personally. He entered the room and sat across from John. I know how you feel, Sebastian said. I was just like you. I didn't believe. I was sure it was all nonsense. Then why are you here? John asked. Why do you believe in this? Because it works, Sebastian answered. I sat in a wheelchair. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't move. And now I can walk. He stood up and walked across the room. He showed that he could move. How? John whispered. I don't know, said Sebastian. I can't explain it. I can only show it. She told me that everything has its own system, its own path, and you must find yours. You have to listen to it. You have to want it. Want what? You have to want to live, Sebastian replied. You have to want to feel again. You have to want to return to what you love. What did you love most in life? My work, John said. I loved money. Money isn't a goal, Sebastian said. It's just a tool. Your goal is what you did with it. What did you do? I made deals, John said. I built an empire. Then that's your goal, said Sebastian. You must want to build again. When you truly want that, your body will follow. John fell silent. He thought for a long time. He looked at Sebastian, who stood before him as living proof that the system worked. So what do I do? He asked. You give me the leftovers, Sebastian replied. That's part of the deal. You give up your old life to receive a new one. John picked up the plate and handed it to Sebastian. All right, he said. I believe. You don't have to believe me, Sebastian said softly. You have to believe yourself. After that conversation, John began to change. He stopped resisting. He began to follow every task Claire gave him. He began to think about his purpose. He began to believe, and a few weeks later he took his first step. He rose from his wheelchair and walked several steps. It was a miracle. The center had begun to work. It began to heal people. It gave them what they had lost, hope. This was only the beginning. But Sebastian knew they were on the right path. He knew that his new mission was the most important one of his life, and he was ready for it. He was ready to give people the same chance he once received, to find themselves again. 10 years passed. The Center for Human Potential, which had started as the ambitious project of one man, had become an international network. Its branches opened all over the world, but all followed the same principles. No pretentiousness, no white coats, only faith and purpose. People came not to be treated, but to learn to live. Sebastian Crawford was no longer a billionaire. He was a philanthropist, a man who had devoted his life to helping others. He walked, he ran, he flew. But his greatest joy was seeing others, who had once been as broken as he was, take their first steps. He didn't just give them money, he gave them hope. He didn't just help them heal, he helped them find their purpose. Ilara remained the soul of the center. She accepted neither titles nor awards. She simply devoted herself to people, sitting in her modest office and listening to their stories, She was the system that had changed thousands of lives. Her leftovers for stray animals had grown into a vast charitable program that fed and healed animals all over the world. It was a part of the system that could never be changed. And Audra had become a legend. She was seen in different corners of the world. She appeared and disappeared like a ghost. People said she showed up wherever someone had lost hope. She was always alone, and she always left as soon as that person found their path. She was simply a key that opened doors. Sebastian often sat on the terrace of his home watching the sunset. He was happy. He had lost everything but found something far greater. He had found his purpose. He had found his mission. And he knew that his journey was only beginning, because faith lived in his heart. Faith that everything has its own system. And if you follow it, you will always find your way. We don't just tell stories, we remind people that every action has consequences. Subscribe and like if you believe in that, and write in the comments what you would have done in the hero's place.